ago.
Before the
Probably in the
90s?
90s. Yeah, probably before the 90s. And I think I went away just for a weekend for myself to Southend, and I had an England T-shirt. And
Did I? I don't remember. Do I remember you having an England T-shirt? I don't know. Yeah.
yeah, I did.
Okay.
I didn't wear it that much.
Okay.
But anyway, I had an England T-shirt, and I was in Southend. This is just like a just time out for myself. So yeah, it was. I think it was in the 90s. And then I was walking down the road, and it was like this guy. It was like, "Are you sure, mate?" And it wasn't done in an aggressive way, but it was like it was like questioning my
Loyalty.
why would I be wearing an English T-shirt? And I can't remember how I challenged it, but it wasn't threatening. But I do know the struggle of identity, especially I think we're more accepting when it comes to the Olympics because we talk about Britain, we don't talk about England. When it comes to like cricket, and I know a politician years ago, this is before my time, was saying, who do you support? Will tell you who your nationality is. And I think I probably in those days will be celebrating the West Indies, although I don't like cricket, and Alex knows the context of that in regards to cricket. And so it's the only time I think people feel a little bit united is like football. And I remember two things I can remember. One, there was one in the early 2000s, or probably, I can't remember which football match, when I think England was playing against Trinidad. And I went to Brixton pub with my husband. And I remember it's like, yeah, so people that weren't even from Trinidad, but black people were just supporting Trinidad. And then Trinidad was slowly losing, and then they were slowly moving across to the English side. So that was interesting to watch. And then the other thing was, and I think this is what threw up the Black Lives, and I think, Alex, we had a long conversation when the last World Cup, when the penalty shootout and those guys missed. And it was like, we sort of like held our head like, oh my goodness, 3 black boys. They miss. Now, in ordinary circumstances, we would accept it as just England usually losing. They get so far and they always win. But the fact that it was 3 black boys, it was like I felt it. And a lot of people felt it. And the onslaught that came on, the tirade of insults and everything that happened. So it's those kind of things that you try to identify, and then you realize actually we're not part of the equation. You try to fit in, but you don't fit in nicely or comfortably in that equation. And I don't know for other cultures if they have that struggle.
I think and I think that's a very interesting point, because I think for Caribbeans, I mean, so for I think it's also important to contextualize with my generation. So your generation, we're both in our 40s. So our parents' generation, they were the generation that came through and experienced whatever struggles they did having to navigate England. So I think although there is a certain appreciation for the fact that coming here to England may have provided better opportunities, like, for example, better standard of living, quality housing, that sort of thing. Socially, there was a lot of challenging experiences. And I think growing up as kids, we got to see firsthand their distaste. So I think as a kid, you carry that with you. We also experienced and made our own observations of things that we saw. Definitely for me, I always felt like black was always an alternative. It was never part of the mainstream. So it was almost like, if I'm going to put this in in train context, you've got the trains going to Edgware, then you got a little branch off going off to Mill Hill, a little tiny branch. I always felt like we were just a branch off. If you weren't white, if you weren't English, you were just a branch off. And so you constantly felt there was always this unspoken undertone, because it wasn't so much said and articulated, it was just the way people viewed you, spoke about things, how things were presented on TV or how things were presented in the textbook, you was always seen as an alternative. And alternative wasn't necessarily something to be celebrated. It probably in many ways was probably behind. For me in school, the only representation of the culture and story was roots, slavery. So even though at home we'd listen to cool music, I didn't feel comfortable to actually let my friends listen to what I listened to at home. I remember the first time coming home from secondary school. I went to secondary school in Seven Kings, and my dad dropped some of my friends home, and he had his Calypso blasting in the car, and I was embarrassed. I was like, "Dad, why are you playing this? Turn it down, turn it down." And I remember looking in the rearview mirror and seeing one of my mates just nodding his head to the music. But in my head, I'm thinking, is he trying to be funny? I'm over the mistrust is what kicked in.
Yeah.
Because I'm just embarrassed. I'm like, "Dad, turn this away. Listen to this for. They're going to think it's primitive music." And so everything about how you felt proud, but at the same time, you felt that others saw you as primitive. So then in the end, it's not like we felt we were primitive, but we felt like other people thought we were. So we toned down what we were into. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was just going to say that, I mean, it's only become fashionable now to celebrate your culture. So, so as people become more educated, people begin to travel, and people are aware. So people use broad terms. So this is when I was growing up. So, you're African, not realizing Africa is a continent. Caribbean was never used, or West Indian. If they were a little bit knowledgeable, you'd be Jamaican, and then you think there's a whole plethora of islands in the Caribbean. But it's only when people start traveling on holiday, then they realize, oh, there's Barbados, there's St. Lucia. And then even for me, educating myself about the Dutch Caribbean islands. So, there's still a sort of like imperialism understanding about the Caribbean anyway, what's acceptable, what is British. And I think for like my parents' generation and those that, and we call it the Windrush generation, but migration was always continuous. There was, I think the outrage that's happening now was when they came to this country, it was almost like an advert, a brochure to say, you're British, because the Queen and the Sovereign did a very powerful media campaign to say, you're part of the Commonwealth, come over and support us. So when they came here, they didn't come here as a Jamaican. They didn't come here as a Grenadian. They came here as part of the British Commonwealth. So they very much saw themselves as British, their British identity, which, although people found it strange, and they thought, well, hang on a minute, my passport says British Jamaican, British Antiguan, British Grenada. So why are you now telling me that I'm not part of this Britishness that you called me over? So I think that's the struggle. And so because they came against that onslaught, that was sort of like transferred to us, that we found it hard to call ourselves British, or it was British in a certain, so you might tick Black British because you've probably never been to the Caribbean if you're of a certain age group. So you struggle tick that terminology. You're Black in color, but you might not be Caribbean, because you've never been to the Caribbean. But that Britishness was always a struggle. So yeah.
Tell me about the struggle. I remember the first document I filled out and it said Caucasian. I was like, what's a Caucasian?
Yeah.
But like, even me, I'm born in Britain, and like they put white British. I'm like, what's a white British? Like, it used to confuse.
And the thing is, and as me and you have spoken about, Ivan, even the whole concept of white, which is something that I'd be keen to talk about in another episode, doesn't make sense, because imagine you as a white British person, you come from Newham, or you come from, say, a poor town in the northeast, versus someone who comes from Windsor, who's also white British. well, what does that mean? Because they're two very different lifestyles with two different
Yeah.
experiences of growing up,
Very true.
perceived very differently. Because a white British Cockney person would be looked down upon if they were walking through the Houses of Parliament with
Without a
your
doubt.
fellow Windsor men.
No, but you
Yeah.
know, some of them are all right. Remember, some of them are all right.
They're
so,
all right. Yeah,
you know,
yeah, we
they're
like
all
them.
right.
I was just gonna say, because I'm kind of half reading the text. I've noticed in the top screen here it has the little red microphone thing, but it's crossed out on the screen. Could that be a reason why apparently Earl can't hear anything either?
No,
And
it was the whole technical doodad was me. I had to refresh the stream for whatever reason, and it kicked in. But I've recorded the
Oh.
whole thing, and I think everyone can hear now, so we're good.
oh, okay, that's why I'm probably not hearing any talking.
But
outside.
basically, just for anyone listening, the moment this ends, I'm going to re-upload it, and you can watch it straight from the start. There'll be no, hopefully, no delay.
Okay, that's good to think.
I think
okay,
we're good.
no
If anyone's having any issues, let me know.
Yeah,
Cool.
I said try again.
Wicked.
That's age-old advice there. Try again.
Well, listen, like I said, this is the first time we've not done this before, so we're still learning and working this out. Samantha, I wanted to ask you the next question because you happen to have, amongst all the many jobs that you've done, you've worked in many secondary schools. You're now currently working in my old secondary school that I used to go to school in Ilford. In Seven Kings, which even in the time that I was there to now that the time that you're there working, it's a very different situation. The question I wanted to put to you, and again, it's just a case of opinion. I don't think no one person speaks for a whole entire group of people. We understand that Caribbean young people continue to underperform in education. Why do you think that's still the case now?
Wow.
Or why has it been the case? I mean, yeah, what can we say? It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a massive question. As well as working in secondary schools, I've worked in the youth justice system,
Right.
and worked with data and analyzing data. And so the only contextual narrative that I can give, so and going back to what I was saying about how involved your parents are in your education, and I'm not talking about just a corrective kind of involvement, but very actively involved. So like
a calendar on the wall with a parents' evening date.
Yeah, for parents' evenings. Yeah, so you have to perform or behave correctly up until
or have the belt hanging up just to remind you before you go to school.
behave up until parents' evening. But classic things that I can remember my dad. So like for example, I look after exams, and then we said to the kids, who hasn't got a calculator? And then people are putting up their hand, and we're like, what? That's not part of your equipment. So my mum was very involved in purchasing all our equipment, making sure we had the books, making sure that we wasn't short of anything. So despite of whatever income bracket it was, in regards to education, there was never a lack. We can say we was quite wealthy. What I'm noticing is, and this is not for everybody, but there's like classic telltale signs, and I will go to the extreme of youth justice. When kids get involved in the youth justice system, and I'm doing the inverted quotes, when they get involved in the youth justice system, there's there's a lack of family involvement. So it's like the kids are dealing with whatever by themselves. So they're either in care, or there's a breakdown in the family for whatever reason. So I'm using really, really broad things here. And so some of those things, and the lack of education also drives you into the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. So the family is very important, and I'm not going to say, oh, because you're in a family unit, your mum and dad is there, or family was like your uncle, or family was your aunt, or family was somebody that knew your mum, that was ready to report something to your mum if you did something wrong. So there was eyes all around. That doesn't happen with young people. So one, you have parents that don't turn up to parents' evening. Why? I don't understand. Even I talk to young kids, and if their parents are struggling with for technology, and I said, but you're on the computer every day, can't you help your mum? I will speak to the parents and said, put your son on, log on for your mum. So it's that kind of involvement. There's kind of that distance. So if you're not aware of what's happening with your education, with your child, you're going to drive through that system and fall behind. Whereas you find culturally, other cultures take an active involvement in their and so in the school that Alex used to go to, I would say probably about 70% are now Asian. And then there's some parents that will really, really get involved, like to the point where it's can be annoying, but they're getting involved. So that's a success factor in itself. I think there's a lack of. I don't know why, and I don't know how to solve that one.
Okay, because it's interesting because you've mentioned about the fact that there was a point when a lot of parents, like you said, like us, I mean, I remember as you were talking, I'm thinking of W.H. Smith's in East Ham, and you knew that, 2 weeks before school, you were going to be there and you buy your new pencil case. And in a weird way, it was kind of fun. You're looking forward to buying your new pencil case and pen and your coloring pencil and all your little protractors and stuff. However, even at that point, Caribbean kids were seen to be underachieving. At a time when I was working in schools, so that was the early 2000s, it was still clear to see that Caribbean kids was underachieving. What was apparent, though, in the difference there is it felt like the parents were almost oblivious to what the kids were getting up to, whereas in our time, the parents seemed to be hands-on. So that would tell me that there's something more deeper than just the hands-on parents. I think that seems to have changed. The parent inequality seems to have probably declined in Caribbean communities in more recent years. And there's probably a lot of explanation behind that. But there seems to be a common denominator during this whole time where Caribbean kids are not achieving. Do you know what I'm saying?
But I would say, Alex, on that regards, because it's a specific statistic and it's more Caribbean boys.
Right.
So Caribbean boys, and then the statistic hasn't changed. There's a Grenadian education minister that wrote a paper in the 70s. Steve McQueen did a film about it. It's almost like the miseducation of black boys. So what happens is boys will enter the education system in primary school, and their energy is super high. And that's probably why they're causing trouble, because it's like they're absorbing that information so fast that the normal school can't keep up with them. So they're classified as a troublemaker. And I'm going to use an example. I remember one time, one lady, her son threw a laptop, a white English lady threw a laptop out the window. And I said to her, but if that was a black boy, wouldn't he have got expelled? And she looked at me because she knew that was just a statement of fact. That's what would have happened because of that person's own educational needs wasn't being supported. And I find that a lot of black boys in primary school excel. As soon as they come to secondary school, something happens when they're like 13, 14, and it's like they go jump, and then nobody's able to pick up that shortfall. And then if you think about it, secondary schools, they have I think there's about 200, just under 300 black heads in the UK. And the ratio, so that is under probably 1% of the ratio of the black population. Now, I'm not going to shine any shade on any school, but if you look at schools setups, there's very few. Everybody's like this middle management. Nobody's in senior management, and then even if you're in senior management, it's specific kinds of roles.
Right.
So there's the only time where I saw strong black leadership, and they still haven't excelled that much. I think black women do better, so I'm at a vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's only working in like public sector, in like local government organizations, that I see black women able to excel to directorship and senior directorship. Black men, it's almost like it's a threat. Right. And so that's another debate in itself. It's a threat. And then you'll see, so if you don't have that kind of, where people like me, so the same question my aunt posed about me looking at a Cosmopolitan magazine, where are you in this picture? Now, if I go to a school and my head of department is Asian and I'm an Asian boy, I'm going to aspire to be like my Asian head of department. We don't have that in most secondary schools.
I think you're raising an important point here, because I think sometimes in early stages of these conversations, and this is the impression I got when speaking to some people from, say, within the white English community, but probably the wider white community, some people, I got the impression that there was a feeling of you're just going to just give black people the job because they don't deserve, even if they don't really deserve to be, they're just going to give it for the sake of it, for the ticking the boxes. And I don't think that is a very valid concern. You don't just want to give jobs where people don't deserve to get the job. However, as you've highlighted quite rightly so, something happened in primary school where these kids, and particularly boys, are at the top of the food chain. And I would even go more specific and say from about year 4, year 5, they start to show signs of decline. And I noticed that because when I was working, say, in Royal Docks, Ivan, I would see those issues. I would see those challenges. Do you remember when you used to have, before you went into Royal Docks, you would have had someone from Royal Docks come in and do some work? Did you have that in your primary school? Do you remember?
No, I don't particularly remember that. No.
So that was what used to happen. And as I didn't go every year, but some years I'll go, and you'll begin to spot those who are like, okay, let's keep an eye. So something is happening. And I believe it's about, if black boys don't see people that look like them in successful positions, the narrative could potentially be, if there's no one else making it, what chance do I have?
Give up before you start.
Right, there you go. And the other thing is, if they're at the top of the food chain, or if they're thriving in early stages, and then they, as a trend, are all underachieving by the end of the educational experience, what is it in the educational experience that's not happening? Because a lot of people, the obvious go-to will be to say, well, obviously they're not focusing in school, they're misbehaving, aren't they? But then the question I would pose is what? So every person is misbehaving and every person is getting it wrong?
And what I would say, I would say to that as well, and there's a few people that I know, this is only personal stories, this is not that have gone back to the Caribbean, and they've excelled so well. And I don't think if they stayed here in the UK, they would have done so well.
Right.
And it's not because, I'm aspiring to be a teacher, but there's a level of discipline, there's a level of aspiration. One thing I do know in, like if you go to America, when people that talk about education, their education doesn't stop at 16. Their education stops when they finish university.
Yeah.
So that's embedded in their head already. So as soon as we go, I'm leaving school at 16. I mean, I know, and it's like, even the ones that don't want to go on to uni or whatever, it's like it's almost like everybody's striving to go to university in America, or that's the end goal to achieve. Or to qualify them in something. Here it's like, well, it didn't work out for me, so I'm just going to do. So aspirations are now coming for people that are creating their own business. They might have media icons that they follow, but then the only problem with that is how sustainable in the long run. What have you learned? So if you're doing everything for yourself, what are you learning about yourself. So some of the things that I've learned as a British Black woman has strengthened me in pursuit of stuff, although it sometimes is the longer route and maybe to my disadvantage, because it was like, you spy through the education. And then when people tell you about the stories of, well, so-and-so failed the exam and now they're a multimillionaire, and then you're like, oh, okay. What was that all about? It's what the fall through is, that because obviously the elite is a very small number. The fall through is a bigger number, so it's the ones that give up has the most impact on society. So it's like, how do we capture them so they're inspired to do something else, that it hasn't ended soon as they leave school, that they can come back later as an older adult. Don't go through that system. Maybe there's some lessons that you need to learn by going out and working on a factory floor, and then go, oh, I'm sick and tired of this, I'm going back to college. But then you've got your kids and whatever and your family, so it's doubly difficult. And then you remember everything that your parents said, study now, because it's difficult when you're older.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is, I mean, because we're already hitting that hour mark already. Again, I think for people who are either listening now or eventually listening when this is recorded and put onto YouTube, this is just, again, a tiny insight into the kind of the constant, what's the word, inner conflicts between identity, and why identity is important in terms of your ability to know where you're going and knowing where you need to be. I always say to a lot of people outside of the Caribbean community, or even outside of the Black community, don't be fooled by the fashionable extrovert image that Black people have. Black people are often seen as trendy, as showmen, as performers, as singers. They're successful sports people. Though there may be truth in that, this is just a small manifestation of the entire Black story. And even still, with those who are even thriving in those specific fields, all of these inner conflicts and conversations are happening constantly. And I think part of the challenge is there's no concluding answer.
Yeah.
I mean, for myself as a British-born Caribbean child, I go back to the Caribbean, with the mentality that I've shown my friends here that I'm Caribbean. But then when I go to the Caribbean, it's quite clear that many people see the Britishness in you.
Yeah, definitely.
And even now, as an older, 40-year-old Black male, it's still not entirely comfortable to say British. And it's interesting that you said, Samantha, that you felt more comfortable with the idea of British more so than English, because also what I would say in the wider British Isles, a lot of Welsh people and Scottish people are quite keen to distance themselves from the concept of Britishness. But as Black people, the British legacy hasn't done us any real favours. However, we do kind of feel more comfortable with saying British than we do English. And I don't think any one is better than the other, but it's just interesting on what the relationships are with English and with British. English almost feels more indigenous, and British almost feels more like a system, like an institution,
Yeah, no, definitely. But it's such a broad topic. You can't tackle it in an hour.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could see there were so many avenues we could have gone down. When you guys are saying we're not going to cover this now, and it's like that's 1 hour
topic.
And I mean, I guess the purpose of this 1 hour conversation is just to give people a bit more insight into, like you said, the constant inner conversations that not only are we having with ourselves, but actually, I mean, I remember from being a kid in school with my Black mates, we were having this discussion. Did your mum do this? Yeah, my mum got me the other day and beat me. But when she beat me, she said this line. And then we're talking about whose parents and what the one-liners are when you're getting beaten. There was always some sort of a reflective element to the conversations that happened within the Caribbean community at an adult level, at a kids level. So these conversations that are happening now are, number one, just an extension of what's always been done. And two, for people who are beginning to understand what is maybe the frustrations that Black people are feeling, even though in the school playground, they may be the trendsetters, or in sports, they may seem like the leaders. Well, hopefully this will provide some insight to say that actually outside of all of those things, these are constant discussions that we're still having to this day, and we're still not 100% clear, especially if you're born in somewhere like Britain or somewhere European. I mean, if you're born in Africa and you live in Africa, or if you're born in the Caribbean, it might be that bit more straightforward. But if you're born in a European island, it's much more challenging to navigate.
Yeah.
Where do you fit in this perspective? Samantha, is there any kind of final words or just anything that you wanted to say on that in terms of maybe a takeaway that you're hoping people can have, or just anything else you wanted to say?
I think I suppose the only takeaway I would say to people that are listening is that anything that I've said here is my own personal experience, my personal sort of like take on or understanding of what's happened growing up. And then you're going to hear a lot from different backgrounds, different upbringings, and some of the stories will match up. So it's not, don't expect it to be a puzzle that fits nicely and then you get an end picture. It's going to be stories. Okay, so this is consistent. So this must be where it's leading to. So it's just to give you an insight. It's a very small window that I've given you about growing up in custody, because there's so much.
We're spoken for hours and hours.
Yeah. There's so much. I mean, me and Alex talk about it all the time, and every time an incident, we can stay up all night. But it's just an incident. So my experience, somebody might listen, and goes, well, that never happened to me, or that's not true. No, it's my experiences, and let's sort of like match the experiences and identify where improvements or where the shortfalls have happened, so we can move forward, because that's the only way we're going to move forward as a community, whatever that means. And that's another topic as well.
110%, most definitely. And I mean, from your perspective, I mean, I know, again, you're not from the Caribbean community, but like, you've listened in. I know me and you, we've had hours of conversation, and I think I want people to understand that as well. The same way that me and my sister, we've spoken for hours, me and you have spoken a lot, and you've shared a lot of thoughts and opinions as well from a very specific perspective. I guess the question I'd want to put to you is, what are you hoping, one, a takeaways for listeners? Do you even have any personal takeaways yourself, or is there any other actual additional remarks you might want to add on this as well?
No, well, I think the main thing, I think my biggest takeaway that I noticed is that I think you said something about your aunt asking you a question when you were younger. And I don't know if this pertains a lot to your question, but the biggest takeaway for me is just, it's so easy to forget that those passing comments that you hear or your family say, that where they can influence your entire life to some extent, or a lot of your behaviors. And I found, having a 7-year-old child, that I have to be very careful in what I say, because all I have to do is sit down and then go back to my to those times where someone had said something and it's just stuck with me, and I'm still to this day like, why did they say that? What did it mean? I might never know. And I think I love the fact that your aunt asked you that question but didn't tell you the answer as such, so you could kind of like work out what to think maybe, or question that. And it's funny because I've got a nephew and obviously a daughter, and I've researched the best way where I can advise them, because I might know all the answers, but telling them the answers doesn't help. And one of the things I read was asking them questions, but clever questions, obviously, that takes them out. So I think for me, just in the biggest takeaway that I personally got from this conversation, other than hearing the great stories that you said, like, I feel like I know you guys a little bit better now, and it was actually really interesting to hear, is just that the biggest takeaway is just be careful what you say, and, ask people questions, especially younger people, to force out that thinking. Yeah, that's a huge one for me from this whole conversation.
Massive. Okay, well, listen, we've come to the end of this live. For anyone that was trying to listen and kind of wasn't hearing us, this is our first one, so we're still learning as we go. But thank you for tuning in. If you do have any feedback, do let us know. We will definitely want to continue to build in this. The next conversation that we will be having is with another guest, someone who's born from Sierra Leone, and as a African-born individual. He does have some very interesting things to say, but also we're going to tackle it from a very specific nuance. So definitely stay tuned for that. But at this point, I want to thank my sister Samantha for being part of this conversation, and I hope this was okay.
Thank you so much
for you.
Yeah, it was. Thank you for inviting me on my first podcast.
Oh, it's your first one.
We're honored.
Okay, I didn't realize. Okay, and Ivan, I guess this is going to be just loaded live. How does it?
So basically, if you haven't already subscribe, because any video that we put out, you will see straight away. You'll get a notification, and not just that. This is our 6th episode. There's 5 episodes waiting for you, including this one. So go back and watch them if you can. We're gonna, as soon as this ends, we're gonna re-upload it, and you can watch it at the start, because Alex and Samantha shared some amazing things that you really don't want to miss. You just caught the back end of it, so we'll see you shortly.
Cool.
See you all later. Bye bye.
Nice one. Bye.